Greetings from the Asian Productivity Organization, APO. This is Mohammad Tanvir Faisal, Program Officer, and I would like to welcome you all to today's Productivity Talk. Productivity Talk, or commonly known as P-Talk, is a series of online discussions where we explore transformative trends and strategies for enhancing productivity and quality across diverse sectors. Today, we are focusing on a topic that is critical for modern governance and public sector efficiency, and that is strategic right-sizing of the public sector for enhanced productivity. Right-sizing in the public sector goes beyond mere workforce reduction. It is about achieving an optimal balance between efficiency, effectiveness, and employment. In an era of rapid digital transformation, fiscal constraints, and evolving citizen expectations, governments must rethink how they design and deliver services. To delve into this crucial subject, we are honored to have Mr. Guy Gordon, a distinguished expert in digital service transformation and public sector management, joining us today. Hi, Gordon. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Tanvir, it's a pleasure to be with you and with the audience today, and it's a pleasure to be collaborating again with the Asian Productivity Organization.
Thank you. It is a privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker, whose career spans over 2 decades in public sector transformation and innovation. Mr. Guy Gordon is an internationally recognized consultant, advisor, and executive coach with extensive experience in strategic planning, digital transformation, and service delivery optimization. He has successfully led multiple public sector change initiatives across Canada and internationally, including with the governments of Mongolia, Singapore, Malaysia, New Zealand, and the UAE. He has served as the Executive Director for Innovation and Digital Service Delivery at the Government of Manitoba, where he spearheaded digital transformation efforts, robotic process automation initiatives, and customer experience programs. His leadership has played a pivotal role in modernizing public sector strategies and enhancing service delivery excellences. Beyond his government role, Mr. Gordon is also co-founder of and Chief Executive Officer at Pigeon Line Research AI, where he focuses on AI-driven research automation. He has contributed to major international conferences and has played a key role in professional development programs, particularly in citizen-centered service management. Mr. Gordon received the 2020 Heisman Leadership Award from the Institute for Citizen-Centered Services in recognition of his substantial contribution to the promotion of and commitment to citizen-centered service delivery in Canada. We're truly privileged to have him share his insights on strategic right-sizing today. Dear viewers, please feel free to share your comments or questions in the live chat below. Mr. Gordon, the floor is yours. You may please initiate the presentation.
Thank you so much. Wow, it's quite something to be introduced like that. I feel honored. I'm really happy today to be talking to this audience, who look to the APO for leadership on such challenging topics as the one we're going to speak about today. I hope that this information is going to prompt further engagement with the APO and its amazing set of leaders, consultants, ideas, and tools. I think we want to have engage in a conversation, or I'd like to present some information about this topic of right-sizing for better public service delivery and public sector productivity. I think you've seen my profile, and we can start with a quote. This is a very interesting quote that I like. It is about both learning and rethinking what you think you already know. And I think this is a great quote that gets us pointed in the right direction. In terms of strategic right-sizing, I thought we would start with trying to give some sense of what we're talking about as a topic. And I've come at it from this particular perspective. I see the question of the topic of strategic right-sizing being part and parcel of a process that leaders should be regularly asking themselves. Sometimes they're afforded the opportunity to sit back and ponder this, but most often circumstances are going to force them to sit back and consider the answers to these questions. The fundamental questions, and from a perspective, public sector, leading a public sector organization, one needs to ask these tough questions. Is our organization organized, operated, and staffed to be able to fulfill its purpose or mandate? That's a fairly broad question, but what it basically is asking is, are we structured and led and organized in a way that's going to allow us to perform well? Or another way of looking about that is, quite frankly, are we a high-performing public sector organization? Are we a mature public sector organization that has a very clear sense of its strategy and has a very clear sense that it is firing on all cylinders? And we'll get to that in a moment. And then a fundamental question is, are we as productive as we should be or need to be? Having led many public sector organizations and having worked with public sector organizations around the world, one of the things about operating in the public service in the public sector is we sometimes know as leaders that we are not being pushed or being required to be as productive as we should be. Sometimes this is a very rational strategy to be able to stay relatively stable, provide a certain degree of stability in terms of the role and mandate we're providing. But oftentimes, what it typically means is, or what can typically happen is that we can get complacent. And the question is, sometimes we need to be pushed out of that complacency. And this is why I think today's conversation is relevant to public sector managers. Because I believe if you have not already been involved in this exercise, you likely will be at some point in your career. And I may suggest at the end of this presentation that this is coming more quickly than you may think. You're inevitably going to be asked to lead an effort to right-size your organization. Typically, in the public sector, as many of us have experienced, this can come as a result of a reorganization. There has been a change in strategic direction on behalf of the government or in behalf of your ministry or department. Decisions have been made and there's been a reorganization, and there's a time to think about right-sizing your organization, thinking about, do you have the right people, processes, and policies in place to be successful? Another typical scenario that we're facing, and will be facing, many of us in the next number of years, are going to be budget reductions. Many of us have faced those budget reductions. Many of us are struggling to get our organization designed and operating properly as a result of budget reductions. However, as we know, predictions point with a lack of productivity in both the public and private sector, that the fiscal pressures are going to be substantial over the next number of years. Then, for some organizations who've been on the productivity journey, productivity improvements, as they are achieved, lead to questions of what opportunities are there to change or even rethink the way we staff and organize and design our work. And lastly, and I will illustrate this by means of a case study, privatization. If you are in that part of the public sector for which it is possible that there are private sector alternatives and the political winds blow in that particular direction, you may be facing a situation where you're going to be asked to get yourself ready or participate in a complete or partial privatization exercise. This is particularly relevant as countries deal with questions of their state-owned enterprises and what role they should provide in the future. So this quote by the famous Italian Renaissance writer and advisor to princes and kings is a great one. Who desires constant success must change his conduct with the times. He also said something along the lines of that is nothing is more difficult than leading change. And he, for those of you who know the story of Machiavelli and have read his work, it is fascinating, his insights from the 14th century on how he advised princes on what they might do to stay in power and to lead organizational change successfully. I think it's very relevant for our conversation today. It's particularly relevant, this ability to lead change, to think about reskilling the organization, redesigning, right-sizing the organization, and leading a right-sizing organization, that is because it's completely relevant for today's world. First and foremost, we know, and I'll show some examples, but citizens demand for service improvement. I'm going to even say the sustaining the levels of past service in face of declining public sector service delivery capabilities is leading governments to really think about how do they organize and deliver public services. I've spoken to the fiscal pressures that exist. We also know that in the public sector, and this has been demonstrated particularly in Nordic countries, European countries, but is coming now to other developing nations, and is a fact of life in many developing nations, is that there are tremendous skill shortages. That, coupled with the amazing increase in capabilities of digital tools, is leading us to think about how should work be organized in order to be productive. Lastly, as I'm going to speak in a moment, there is the emerging impact of artificial intelligence on public sector productivity. At this point in time, there is an active debate amongst academics and analysts about the impact on public sector productivity. Some would gauge that this productivity opportunity has not yet seen its full potential and may not yet live up to the expectations or hype. Others are a little bit more on the side that there is already signs of a tremendous set of opportunities that lie with the introduction of artificial intelligence as it's already being adopted by many organizations around the world, including ASEAN nations. And I think many of the participants will already have seen initial forays into the use. If they subscribe and have at their workplace Microsoft tools, or they go on the internet, they'll already be seeing how these are being integrated already into the productivity suite, which leads to a fascinating set of questions about how will work be changed? What will we expect employees to do? How are we going to optimize this? And how are we going to build a culture that sustains productivity? As was highlighted during the introduction, strategic right-sizing, in terms of getting the organization's processes, jobs design, tasks, staffing, design of work, all set out in a way that makes sense, oftentimes involves a trade-off between achieving effectiveness as a government department versus efficiency, and oftentimes in the public sector is about the competing challenge of employment. I've been asked and had debates with people in our country about, is it really important that we reduce the number, that we introduce productivity tools and productivity methods in healthcare, for example? Or is it better for the economy to have huge, large bureaucracies made up of people representing the most skilled and the least skilled in our economy, all contributing and all deriving employment? It's an interesting question, and it is in many countries a very important political instrument that governments used to reward its voters and constituencies. So employment can be a very interesting part of the equation. I'm going to talk now briefly about a case study that I and the APO recently was involved with. And because it's still ongoing, I am not going to mention the particular jurisdiction where this was. But I do want to give an overall illustration of what the leadership was faced with. Possibly this is something you've experienced. Possibly this is something you're going to experience. In this particular case, this is a case study of a state-owned enterprise. The government having a very clear strategic sense of that it's needing to look to its leading state-owned enterprises to become more and play a more important role in contributing to the economic development and its development goals, made a decision strategically to turn to that organization and give its leadership a direction to what we call right-size the organization. That typically was cast or could be cast in the context of what is the right number of employees it should have. That is part of what this story is about, but more importantly, it was about thinking about what should the organization do and not do, what skills were required, what are the tasks those employees should really be focused on, how many and in what way should they be organizing their work, such that it's leading to an increase in productivity, throughput, return on investment, a return of investment in terms of economic return to the citizens of that country via the government. In this particular case, they were instructed to look and consider cost reductions and employment in the order of 25%, which is a huge magnitude. At the same time, they were tasked with leveraging an increase in economic activities such that it could boost and further local economic development. Many of you will know stories from various countries where state-owned enterprises, particularly the most successful ones, have become national champions and have driven and led economic development through amazing leadership, clear direction, innovation, focusing on being the world's best. That was part of the story here, to accelerate the pace to becoming a world-class organization. And underlying it all is a desire to be prepared for potential privatization. What a challenge. In this case, the leadership of this industrial organization had to face that they needed to think about a new operating model that would be aligned with this strategy. And they, to their credit, have had a very clear strategy outlined recently that sort of leads them on the path. They have the direction, but what they needed to do is find the tools and the instruments to be able to think more deeply about what was the right size of the organization. And when I mean size, I am not just talking about the physical number of employees. It's much more than that. It's about what are the capabilities, not just in terms of process capabilities, but human capabilities. What are the core capabilities this organization needs to have? What are the competencies, the skills, the knowledge of its staff? And most importantly, what is the culture? Is there a culture of productivity? This is where the APO and the APO Business Excellence Framework plays such, and has played and is playing such an important role. One of the core sort of instruments that was involved in this exercise was an analysis of the work, of the jobs, of what people were doing. Was it the right work? Were they doing it appropriately? Were they doing it efficiently? Were there possibly too many people doing the same job in a way that was completely unnecessary? Yes, the answer was, in many cases, there was a complete need to redesign the organization from top to bottom. Its structure, its work processes, the roles, the job descriptions. What a job. But a plan was put together through very tough analytical procedures, consultation, engagement, consideration, and debate. And now that plan has been presented to the leadership, whose job it is, the most difficult job, is to lead this transition and transformation. That's what's going on. And that's what I'm talking about today in terms of right-sizing an organization. All right. As I mentioned, one of the really critical elements of this is the APO and the Business Excellence Framework. Now, many of you are familiar with this. If you're not, you should definitely go onto the website and check it out, because it is an incredibly powerful framework. It is really, in the way it's being used, and we've used it in the APO, is it's really a guidance. It's almost like the GPS, the strategic GPS for the organization. Where are we going? Where are we on our path? Are we doing the right things? It's really a guidance document to allow for progress and evolution, but it's forcing the organization to ask itself critical questions and to measure, to make critical decisions, to implement critical activities, and to measure progress against that. This common assessment framework is extremely valuable and extremely helpful. Next, I'd like to refer to something that is a little bit more relevant for us, or has particularly been designed for those of us in the public sector. And that is the notion that business excellence in the public sector has been defined and has been used as a framework for quite a number of years, very successfully for the last 30 years, around the concept of high-performing public sector organizations. Here are the elements that must be implemented. Not one, not two, not some, not a few, but all. You need to be getting all of these elements going and working together. These are the core drivers, the core elements that contribute to high-performing organizations. Without these elements, the evidence demonstrates you're unlikely to be a high-performing organization, differentiating yourself in terms of your ability to deliver customer, citizen-centered services, deliver programs that are effective, that deliver tangible outcomes, that make a difference to the citizens of your country and fulfill those public policy goals that governments are elected on or are able to sustain their credibility and authority to lead. Leadership is absolutely the first and foremost element. And this is where you, as the audience, know that this is what you're being asked to deliver, is you have to take the leadership role to be able to implement and design a strategy that makes sense for you, to have a strategy that involves a capability of being able to deliver citizen-centered service in such a way as it engenders trust and confidence. And it must be built on a foundation where people are a resource, a capability, a set of competencies that are a culture where delivery and operations come together to achieve the organization's goals. So this public sector framework, productivity framework, which highlights these 5 dimensions I've talked about, being focused on the delivery of services that are citizen-centered, which take the citizen's view into account and are regularly measured and monitored, and for which there's a continuous improvement effort, is critical. the quality, the notion of embracing the concepts of quality, of process, of lean. These are really critical elements that are sometimes foreign to the public service, but need not be. And then the adoption of a concept of leading for innovation. In some ways, that's a very big, important theme today. Experimentation, thinking about what's coming, embracing what's being offered as opportunities. That's what we're talking about. That's for the last 20 years, that's been talked about, particularly in the form of e-government. And in particularly, what's extremely important is the idea of embracing regulatory reform, given how much of what we do in government is the provision of regulatory services. So why is this important? It's incredibly important because I said, if we're not able to balance and understand what it takes to build a well-performing organization based on engaged and supported employees who are delivering high-quality services, we are not going to be able to achieve citizen service satisfaction. And without that, we are going to be struggling to retain and maintain the trust and confidence of our citizenry. This is something that governments have been thinking about and working towards for the last 20 years and have been making considerable strides until recently. And COVID and the epidemic has thrown a significant wrench into our progress. But if we don't get this right, if we don't think about reorganizing, rethinking what we do, how we're organized, how we embrace innovation, how we rethink about the way we organize our services, how we build a culture that's based on productivity, then we significantly significantly create a risk that we are going to degrade our public services and lead to tremendous challenges of governance. There will be, and there is establishing, and we're seeing a certain lack of trust and a diminution in the confidence of governments to deliver. This is a very challenging issue. Here's a couple of examples. We have from Canada, as Citizens First, which is measured over 20 years, the progress in being able to establish high quality services and citizen satisfaction. And what we saw was during the COVID period, a precipitous decline. The progress of 20 years was wiped away by the governments struggling now to deal with productivity, as the productivity has declined precipitously in the public sector as a result of a number of factors. One of the things about systems is that when they break, when they were tightly wound together, when they were established and then thrown into the thrown up against the storm of COVID, is that many of them began to break. Many of these were related to the right-sizing questions. Did we have the right people? Did we have enough of the people? Were we resilient enough to sustain the levels of service that public began to expect? What happened when more people came into the office than we expected? But it has also led to this sort of sense of frustration amongst the public. And you see that both in Canada and in the UK. This is an Ipsos study from 2024, very recent, that shows a substantive decline. If you follow the UK, you know this has also been tracking very closely with the reality that the fiscal situation in the UK has led to austerity. and austerity has led to governments being forced to reduce the level of service to their citizens. So not only has there been a drop in the level of service, but the quality of service has dropped precipitously. The number of complaints to government in the UK has doubled in this period of time. So there is something incredibly important. I'll just take 1 minute to discuss a case study from Canada, the Passport Office. What you see here are Canadian citizens in one of its largest cities doing something that absolutely was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, beyond thinkable. It was absolutely inconceivable that members of the public would be forced to take their own camping and equipment and camp overnight in order to go in line to get early enough to be able to get a passport. Chaos, literally chaos in this system. This was at one point, this was one of the most efficiently run organizations in the Canadian public service. But chaos ensued as the system broke down, as productivity slipped away. Now, to be fair, they have managed to make a lot of changes and bring in additional staff and deal with the backlogs. And now things are getting better. But as is the case in Canada with healthcare and many of the public services, they have definitely declined in quality as governments have really been facing significant challenges. So I just want to talk for a few minutes now about some of the tools of right-sizing. One of the things that we used in this project was a number of techniques that I referenced, but I think these are a good number of ideas and concepts that can be brought together to help organizations think through what needs to go into the right size of an organization. I think, as we know, user-centered or citizen-centered design is really critical. As you're designing your services, your operations, you need to have the user at the center of those designs. You need to understand what works, what doesn't work for the end users. This is central to the concept of quality. This is central to the concept of lean, and has, I would very positively say, become adopted as a much more commonly used and much more it's been used much more widely and has proven to be an incredibly powerful tool, as has the adoption of lean and lean management. We in Canada, and my role in various organizations, is we've seen lean become integrated into many of our approaches. And building a culture of lean has been difficult, though not impossible. Getting the staff to think about opportunities where they can bring improvement into their daily work and to become responsible and accountable for improvements. It's a very, very powerful tool, as is the adoption of sort of Kaizen methodology with regards to digital transformation. There's been some stuff written by the APO on this recently that I thought was good to reference. Lastly, I'm just going to refer to sort of what the technology that we used in the one project that I spoke about was data-driven organizational design. And this is where it's now very possible to do really good organizational design and use models and software to begin designing and modeling and testing and adapting to testing theories and building an organization and then managing that organization on an ongoing basis, and even modeling what might be coming in the near future. So that's, I think, a very, very important design, and gets into certain techniques, one of which is FIDRAM, where you can start to model and think about what should be an optimal number of employees and positions by thinking about things like fixed roles. How do certain parts of the organization need to be adjusted in terms of whether or not there's an incremental increase or decrease by percentage. Sometimes there is we can use driver analysis to think about the right number of employees based on what we think is going to happen in terms of planned work volume. That's certainly what they've done at the post office. They've done modeling there to be able to figure out how do they need to readjust their staffing levels and to accommodate for the problems they were having. Many cases you can use ratio analysis. In other words, do we have the right number of HR staff to employees? This is a very interesting exercise and very politically challenged, very politically contentious when you walk into an organization. But if you're going to take an external view of most organizations, if you're going to ask somebody to come in and look at your organization, or you're going to take an honest assessment of your organization, these fixed ratios very quickly tell you how you've allowed the weeds in your garden to grow. And this is what it's about. Oftentimes, we in the public sector will come up with many reasons why we think we should add staff. We need more staff. We'd like to have more staff. We could use more staff. We don't want to upset staff. We've been told to add staff. But when it comes time, as it inevitably will, when you have to weed the garden, this type of methodology works super well. And lastly, there's activity analysis. As your organization utilizes and embraces automation, AI, lean, new equipment, new techniques, my goodness, do you start seeing the opportunities for changing the number of employees or redeploying employees to other activities. And that's probably the other side of this equation. I know this has come off as sounding a little bit like it's all negative, and I think there are some things to be thought about, but the big thing about right sizing for us is it's actually an incredible opportunity. It's an opportunity to become world-class. It's an opportunity to have dramatic impacts on your constituents, on your stakeholders, on your citizens. I'm just going to spend the last 5 or so minutes talking about AI public sector productivity, because I think this is what's going to force all of us to rethink about, as already probably doing it for you, to think about right sizing and how we work in the public service. 2 years ago, one could probably put one's head in the sand and think, oh, it's just another IT project. It'll come. It won't have much of an impact. I don't really need to pay too much attention to this. Well, here's an example from the UK. This was from the Guardian newspaper a month or so ago, and it said that 1 in 5 doctors are already using AI for daily tasks. They're using it to write letters, organize their workflow in the workplace, reduce administrative burden, but they're also using it to suggest diagnoses. My son is a physician. He has a background in big data, in IT, and he significantly thinks that his role, he knows already how much his role is going to change, or he anticipates his role to change. He anticipates huge amount, the potential for change is huge. So this is just one example. And we know that 60% of employees in most organizations have already started to begin to work with these tools. Most of them are generating productivity improvements and keeping those productivity improvements to themselves. That's what Professor Ethan Mollick from Wharton School has been talking about on his podcast, which I advise you to look at, and I'll make a reference later. They're finding tremendous utilization of these tools, and typically the capture is at the individual level and not at the organization level. And he advocates, as I will in a moment, that it's our role as leaders to try and find a way of bringing that productivity benefit to the organization. So there are some pretty bold predictions out there about what's going to happen. And it's good to kind of keep these in the back of one's mind. Some of these predictions from organizations like Gartner and well thought through and well respected consulting organizations are saying, look, in many cases, this is going to flatten the organization out. There's going to be changes to the way in which we work. And in this case, they're looking at private sector, particularly middle management roles that will be impacted as the wave of artificial intelligence starts to come upon us and become more pronounced. Part of that wave is that we're seeing just last week and just in the last couple of weeks, the introduction of the next wave where AI is going from a passive tool to a proactive tool. And what they mean by this is what they're calling agentic AI. So AI has evolved from simple chatbot type of applications to autonomous decision-making. In other words, these agents are starting, and we'll see these over the next 12 to 24 months play itself out, is that these organizations, these systems now can problem solve on their own. They can set goals, they can problem solve, and they can start to take action on their own. So we'll see this in terms of AI assistance being made available to all of us, first through our phones, and then through our desktops, and then through specialized applications. This brings a huge set of challenges for us, but particularly from the perspective of right sizing. We are going to have to rethink culturally what it means to work. Who's going to do the work? What kind of work will that be? How many people will be required? What skills will we have to retain? How are we going to work with these agents? And this isn't just going to be for the IT people. Every single one of your employees carries an iPhone. Every single one of your employees, probably not all, but probably 2 out of 3, is already using these tools, whether your organization has blessed it or not. And as these tools get more powerful, we're going to be forced to really think a lot of shifts. So the mindset, your mindset as a leader, your mindset needs to change. But behind it, you need to be thinking about the opportunities these productivity tools are going to provide us. So we need to be thinking about the future. We need to be thinking about investing in the development of your people. Putting your head in the sand is not an option. You putting your head in the sand is not an option. Your employees putting your head in your sand is not an option, in my opinion. There are too many opportunities here. So I'm going to conclude with a few things. Firstly, I've really highlighted the skills and capabilities and resources of the APO. I would, if you haven't already done so, please read the APO Public Sector Toolkit. Educate yourself on this topic. It's not difficult. There are lots of books. There are lots of blogs. Just go on YouTube and start spending 5 or 10 minutes every few days. You will be amazed at how much you learn. If you're so inclined, take a course. Understand how this technology works. Despite all of the discussions, if you actually look at it, it's not that complicated. There are a few things that you'll remember from math, but some of the courses out there will leave you equipped to build your own tools very quickly. Play with this. Play with the tools. Play with Claude, ChatGPT. Play with DeepSeek, which was just released last week and has blown a hole in the financial markets. It's actually a very cool tool. And then again, being offered a different sort of architecture, different technique coming, and it's basically disintermediating the existing players by showing that it can deliver the same results at 1/10 of the cost or 100th of the cost. What that means is that these tools are becoming available and to almost anybody who has an inclination. But the most important thing you can do is experiment in your organization. You need to be looking for opportunities to learn. Do not follow the direction of your CIO who tells you that I will guide you carefully on how we're going to implement this. You need to get out ahead of this because you are going to be accountable for productivity, not the CIO. And with that, I'm going to conclude and answer any questions. I know there's some questions have been prepared, so I really thank you and look forward to your further engagement with this topic and further engagement with the APO.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon, for a thought-provoking session on strategic right-sizing in the public sector. To further elaborate on certain issues, we would like to initiate the question and answer session. First, the question would be pitched: how do you define strategic right-sizing, and how does it differ from traditional downsizing in the public sector?
Well, as you've seen, I have taken the view that right-sizing involves sort of a more broad consideration of how am I organizing what's my responsibility to organize the way in which my organization operates and delivers services. So it's not just a function of I am taking this idea of right sizing and I've been asked to go through a typical budget reduction at 5% or 3%. I'm thinking that there's a way of redefining this concept of right sizing to be more strategic. You need to be thinking about not just the number of people, but which is important because that is a drain on your resources. But what are those people doing? What are their competencies? And how am I leveraging what I'm learning, what's brought to me through the vast capability of productivity tools we have? How am I incorporating that into building an organization that is not only the right size, but does the right things for the right price? That will be my answer to the question.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. The second question would be, can you share an example of a government or organization that successfully implemented right sizing and the key factors behind its success?
That's a good question. I think most of us have been involved in an exercise to right size, and sometimes these have been led from within, and oftentimes they've been imposed by external circumstances. So there are many cases where leadership teams, I'm sure many of the people on this call would participate in efforts where they've really thought through how to reorganize their organization. But some examples I would point to, although we can't speak to the specifics, but the APO has been involved in a number of these. The one that I was involved with involving that organization, was one of the largest organizations, state-owned enterprises in that particular country. I think they went about it the right way. They were systematic and did a great job in involving key stakeholders, but particularly their strategic group, their finance team, and their HR team in really rethinking what is the design of the organization, what is the design of the work, how do we intelligently, using data, using good design principles, how do we rethink the way in which work gets done here and who does it and what number of people we're going to need to do it in order to produce in order not just to stand still, but to fulfill a mandate of becoming a better organization. I think right sizing is oftentimes seen in such a negative light. It's actually an opportunity to have a breakthrough in thinking and to recast the role. Now, having said that, we know it's very, very difficult to do in politically charged, in unionized environments, in traditional public sector bureaucracies. It is difficult to do, but it's still something that from time to time organizations are going to be asked to do.
What would be the biggest misconceptions that you have encountered with the public sector leaders about right sizing and how they can overcome these barriers?
I think they see it as being just a matter of a simple mathematical exercise as an effort to sort of achieve, you know, budgetary targets that are set out by the Treasury, right? Rather than seeing it as an opportunity to really systematically rethink the way they deliver and taking into account the opportunity to be much more balanced, to have the business excellence framework element where they're really understanding the critical interplay between policy, service delivery, service design, culture, engaged and effective employees, and policy outcomes, and getting that right, getting the size right, getting the competencies right. That's what they need to be working on. That would be my answer to that question.
In your case study of the state-owned enterprise, what was the most challenging part of implementing right sizing and how it was addressed?
I think the most well, first of all, the story is not over by any means. These are long-term transformational initiatives. I think the most challenging element is the core culture and what I mean by that, fundamental views of what the organization is designed to do. And let's sort of say that there's a lot of legacies of its history. It was part and parcel of being in the public sector. It was part and parcel of a part of a world where there was a transition from a Soviet style or communist style approach to one that was now market driven. Those concepts, those ideas are very take a long time to change. So the culture change is what's required, but the leadership and the leaders in that organization can and do see the future. This was an organization that when we went into study had some of the most outdated processes and approaches that one would find anywhere. Yet at the same time, this is an organization who had already embraced in some of its critical processes the adoption and practices of the most innovative AI manufacturing and processing techniques that exist. These were world leaders. So in the same organization, you had both elements. What the leadership needs to do is create a culture where the best comes out and the history is left behind. And I know that impacts people and impacts communities, but that's their challenge because the goal and the purpose is much broader than one small community.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. In your understanding and experience, how do you define the APO Business Excellence Framework and Productivity Initiative, and how it can help the public sector organizations?
Yeah. Okay. I think the most important point is, and it was very interesting because one of the things, having worked and led, I think my light has gone up. Let me just see if I can. One of the things is, I would say that as I tried to articulate, when you're running a large organization and you're thinking about what do I need to do, having a compass, having a set of principles, having a relatively simple plan or a framework that you can use and explain and engage with people from all levels of your organization is extremely powerful. So the business excellence framework's power comes from the fact that it really includes what we know are the key ingredients to making a good meal, right? Every leadership team is going to have to figure out what that is. But if you want to make an excellent meal and bring your family around, and they're going to come home and say, "You are a great cook. That was worth it. This was excellent. You made us all feel good. You brought us together." You need to know that those ingredients, and you can't substitute. They all have to be good. You can't have 3 or 4. You can't miss a critical ingredient. Otherwise, your organization, the meal's not going to work very well. So I think the power of the business excellence framework is its resilience and it contains the critical. We know it's the critical ingredients, and what it does is it gives organizations something that they can come back to and participate and engage with and demonstrate and learn from. It's a learning tool. It guides them to say, "Hey, we've made this amount of progress. This is what's missing. This is a scorecard. We could do better. This is where we need to put more emphasis." And it gives them that framework to begin their journey. And within that, there are many, many things at a tactical level that we know work very well. So in the public sector, there are many methodologies, many approaches that are built into the business excellence framework around operations, around employee human resources, around citizen-centered service delivery. We have, over the last 20, we've built a lot of expertise, a lot of tools, a lot of resources. We can really help organizations accelerate their work. So there's a lot of success that's built in there that can be followed. And even when it comes to new things like AI and what that means, the framework can still be extremely relevant for helping managers guide that. So yeah, there's your 60-second advertisement on the business excellence framework.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. What lessons can the developing economies learn from UK and the UK in terms of improving citizen satisfaction through right-sizing?
Wow, that's a good question, because it's an interesting notion, right? Maybe some things not to do and things to do. One of the things about the Canada and the UK is, unfortunately, the right-sizing lessons are, you've got to be very careful in terms of not taking your eye off the ball when it comes to sustaining the level of service delivery, because it does. The lesson that they can learn from Canada is that the history shows that public sector value chain actually works in both ways. When you do a good job, trust and confidence goes up. When you take your eye off the ball, or when circumstances force you to make cuts and you don't accommodate for those reductions and you drop services, trust and confidence in government goes down, and governments are inevitably changed, and leaders in public sector organizations are changed. So it is a very powerful series of lessons that one should be mindful of. Many of the countries in Asia, Southeast Asia, have made incredible strides in service delivery. And they know that citizens, and we know this, that citizens have a very similar expectations of service, of what they want. We know this from the research. We know this from going out and talking to people. I've done workshops in all of these countries, and inevitably we know that citizens have the same view of what they're expecting. In certain parts of the world, they're also very concerned about things like trust and confidence and corruption, right? So these are all things that governments need to continue to work on. Sustaining it and then thinking about moving to that next generation of service improvement is what I would say Canada and the UK have stalled on. They are actually going backwards. And I think the other countries around the world, the members of the APO, can hopefully avoid those pitfalls and continue their progress, and in many cases continue to outclass and outperform Western nations with regards to service improvements.
Thank you again. You mentioned about AI will play a role in eliminating middle management positions. So how should the public sector employees prepare for this shift?
I used that reference to illustrate, one part of the argument to say that a lot of jobs are going to be eliminated and so forth. I'm not so sure that that's accurate. I think a lot of jobs are going to change. And I think the public sector, to its credit, has a certain, on the one hand, it does have the advantage in that I think in many cases there will be an opportunity for the public service to not simply shrink, but the public service will be able to actually sustain its employment levels, but will actually be able to produce more. They'll be able to deliver more for citizens with the same number of employees. So I think it's about not so much as reducing positions so much as it is creating opportunities for those who want to embrace it. We know lots of people, a good percentage of people. In fact, I'm going to ask people to go to check out the Slack persona, AI persona survey. If you go to Slack, just look up the AI persona, take that, and you'll get a very interesting question of where you are. What kind of persona are you? Are you somebody who's fearful? Are you somebody who's quiet but actually taking advantage of AI? Or are you and your employees people who are proponents? The most important thing you have to be is proactive. If you take a positive, inquisitive approach, you are going to be fine. You are going to excel. If, on the other hand, you're still very, very scared, you've got to really challenge that. You've got to realize that your child, your 6-year-old, your teachers, your child's teachers, your child's it doesn't matter what sector, your child's doctors, your child's dentists, social work, they're all embracing this technology. Your child is embracing this technology. So I think it's for all of us to become more active and more engaged, and then start to think about the opportunities and see where we can add more value. And also think about some of the limits. And I think there might be a question on that coming.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Now, how do we ensure ethical considerations are addressed when integrating AI into public sector decision making?
Okay. This is a great one. And I could talk for a long time. And this is why I put that book by Yuval Harari, the great historian. He's a historian, Israeli historian. Amazing book, Yuval Noah Harari, an amazing discussion of what's going on. You've raised a great question, and I'm so pleased that it's there. In the public sector, we have an additional set of rights and responsibilities to be ethical, to be appropriate. There are many ethical questions, but there are ethical ways of using AI appropriately. There are things where one needs to be mindful of. But to cut to the chase, the most important thing is you must keep the humans involved in making the ultimate decision. One of the problems we're going to have, and we're already having it, is we cannot become lazy and assume that what is being generated by the AI is either accurate, appropriate, or unbiased. There is a tremendous amount of bias against people of various cultures, races, sexes, ideology. So I would really think about the fact that one needs to think, and the organization needs to have a structure, a governance structure, where it's carefully thinking through these questions. It cannot just let the AI run by itself. Boy, this is going to be a subject of a lot of discussion, a lot of debate. There are many organizations out there. Just type it in, do a little bit of research on the topic, and you'll see where countries like leading organizations in the EU, in Canada, around the world, ASEAN and others have really started to give a lot of guidance as to what we as public servants need to be thinking about. There's lots of promise, but you need to be mindful of the fact that you have to think about the ethical implications of what you're doing. There's a lot of evidence to show that when people started to get particularly dangerous, and a very good book is called AI Snake Oil, written by two professors from Princeton. And their main hypothesis is be extremely cautious when you're using AI in any way, shape, or form to do predictions, particularly involving the impact of policy on people. Their argument is we are nowhere near the capability of making accurate predictions. So just because the statistics tell you that there's a percentage that somebody may do something in the future, that's typically very ineffective public policy to use that to inform decisions on what you should do involving groups of people. Life is far more complicated than even the best AI methods are. It is a very dangerous practice, and unfortunately, it's been used far too often because organizations are trying to save money quickly. So that would be just an illustration. So AI Snake Oil is a great book. I wish I could remember the names of those guys off the top of my head, but I can't. But that's the name of the book. You'll find it online.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. With the rise of data-driven decision-making, how can public sector managers balance efficiency, effectiveness, and employment to avoid unintended consequences?
I think the way they do it is through innovation and experimentation and taking a bottom-up learning experimentation approach. I think as we learn how to master, and I used master these beasts, we will start to figure out what the limits are. And I think the limits are going to be very situational and context dependent. But what it takes is a little bit of willingness to get one's hands dirty, to experiment and involve, but also to retain one's role as public servants, of being critical thinkers, of asking the broader public interest questions. That's how we and collaborating and learning and challenging and being thoughtful. That's, I think, how we learn how to find that appropriate balance. It's an interesting world we're entering into. I mean, we always live at interesting times, but I think in particular for young public sector managers, and I know in talking to yourself, you've seen this up front. Your career is going to be impacted by these tools. Productivity is absolutely critical to our economic success and our future wealth. We're being given these amazing tools, but we have to be careful. I don't remember if you saw the Disney, or it wasn't Disney, but there was a famous story about the sorcerer and the apprentice and trying to use a magic broom to do the work, and it just basically got out of control. And then they sort of had to sort of counteract this poor person the apprentice was seeing all of these brooms cause chaos and had to help seek the sorcerer's advice to assistance to correct this problem. I mean, AI has the potential of doing that, but we have to be not relying on the sorcerer, but we have to take control ourselves. So that's kind of the way I would say we have to really think about that.
Thank you again. And for the last question, for public sector leaders facing resistance to right sizing, what practical first steps would you recommend to build momentum for change?
I think discussion, education, and demonstrated wins, demonstrated successes are the way typically success is built in the public sector. I think it takes time to do this. It takes effort to sort of get oneself organized and plan ahead for a process of change and change management. But I think people are convinced when they see that there's going to be something in it for them. So this recent discussion of that I presented, this recent conversation from Professor Mullock from Wharton, and his and stuff we're seeing from other sources of evidence are showing that in your organization today, probably most of the most of your knowledge workers are already starting to play with these tools. And as they say, the issue becomes they're already gaining benefits. They're already saving time in their day. They're already making better decisions and leveraging just the basic tools we have now. I think people are scared to talk and let people know they're doing this. They're scared of losing their employment. They're scared of admitting that they used an assistant. That's going to change. We're going to have a culture, but that's where that's going to be embraced. And I think your role is to sort of meet people where they're at, build on their enthusiasm, and show them that right sizing can be to their advantage. Not an easy thing to do, particularly if in fact, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. I think about the case study that we were involved with in this organization. For some people, for certain communities, it's going to be the most painful thing they go through in their lives. But for others, it's going to be one of the best opportunities I've ever seen, because over the next number of years, that organization is going to be delivering benefits to the citizens in ways it had never done before, and is going to, benefit people's children and grandchildren. So that's kind of the thought I would have. Anyway, I know it's not a great answer, but that's the best answer I can give you based on what I know today.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Before concluding this question and answer session, could you please share key takeaways from your talk that participants can implement in their respective roles?
Well, I think I've illustrated them, and I'll just repeat again. I think the most important thing to do is not. Well, I think the first thing to do is not put one heads in one sand, and one is to start to think about the questions of what does the future of my organization look like? What is going to be the right size? What are going to be the right capabilities? So I think, first of all, it's about beginning to think that process through and start to be prepared for these opportunities. Familiarize oneself with the literature, with the tools, with the APO, and begin to experiment, begin to play with these ideas. I think that's what I would do. When it comes to organizations that are thinking that they need to go through this now and start going through right-sizing exercises, I think engaging with resources like the APO and colleagues that have been through similar types of exercises, that's usually a great place to start. And I think it's about learning what these capabilities and tools can do for us, and then getting oneself prepared. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon, for sharing your insights on optimizing government structures, leveraging technology, and enhancing citizens' trust through efficient service delivery that have been taken in across the world. To our audience, your engagement through question and comments will enrich this session. Let's transform today's insights into actionable strategies in our respective fields. Public sector organizations are at crossroads where embracing AI, data-driven decision-making, and lean processes can redefine efficiency and impact. As professionals, it is our responsibility to drive these changes effectively. With that, we conclude this session. Thank you, Mr. Gordon, for joining us and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us and contributing to its success. We look forward to seeing you at the next APO Productivity Talk. Have a great day.
Thank you.